from sunny and clear of storms, Central Florida. I'm West 2 meteorologist Eric Burris.
Annie in Savannah, Georgia. I'm WJCL 22, Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson. Eric, here we are tracking the tropics. The hurricane season is underway, and so far we've had zero storms, and that's definitely something we're not complaining about right now.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So this is a look at the basin right now, and you can see, I mean, there's definitely some tropical activity, some moisture out there, but as of right now, there's nothing that has developed, has really gotten going. And to that point, Jeremy, it's the first season in over a decade that both the Pacific and the Atlantic have not yielded a named storm thus far through the calendar, which is kind of an interesting little statistic there.
Yeah, you have to go back to 2014 to find a quiet start from May into June, like we've had this year. Again, you expect May and June to be quiet, but last year we already had a couple of storms at this time, and you were mentioning the Atlantic Basin there. You see those kind of orange or red blobs; those are thunderstorms out there. But right now, they're being sheared apart, which we can talk more about a little bit later. But as you just pulled up here, no storms so far. And that's a good thing, a quiet start to the season. We know that'll eventually change, but
Yeah.
let's just take quiet while we can.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So as you mentioned, Jeremy, I think it's kind of interesting. So zero named storms through June the 7th, today's day, right? Last year we had two named storms through, but what's kind of interesting is if you look back, Jeremy, as you mentioned, one named storm through today's date in 2022, one named storm in 2021. In 2020, we had three named storms through today. The last season was 2014 that did not have a named storm through today's date. So it is kind of an interesting little thing. And I think that what's equally as interesting, my friend, is the idea that the water temperatures are so boiling hot, and yet we still have not gotten into any kind of tropical development just yet.
Yeah, different parts of the Atlantic Basin, I've seen comparisons that they're like, hey, this is more like the back half of July, early August water temperatures out there right now. So the departure from average definitely is running above average through most of the Atlantic Basin. But as we've always stressed through some of our methodology, is that water temperatures are one ingredient. Also, right now, I think there's just a little too much upper level wind shear
Right.
down in parts of the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico. There's been a ton of smoke, lots of wildfires out there, and then maybe even a little bit of dust now coming off from the west coast of Africa.
Right. So all of these things considered, it's important to understand that think of warm waters as like, fuel. You pour fuel on something, you still need that spark. And without that spark, you're not going to get that explosive development, which, I think it's safe to say, like, we're both super okay with no development, but you need that extra little bit.
Yeah. And so far, we're seeing the El Nino fading in the western or in the Pacific Ocean. So that main area there near the equator where we had the El Nino, it's almost to neutral technically. If you take the region, it's like a 0.2 positive right now, so pretty much neutral. Those blue colors there that you have is where we do expect a La Nina may form at some point in the hurricane season, and really at what point may make some of those upper level winds a little more conducive to tropical development in the Atlantic Basin. So even though this is like thousands of miles away, it can impact what happens a little closer to home.
It really is remarkable when you think about it, because watching the Pacific to understand what's going to happen in the Atlantic seems counterintuitive, but everything, in Earth is an attempt at a balance. And so I think that that's kind of the remarkable part of all of this. So yeah, when you look at those blue shades, the Pacific is cooling. When you look at the Atlantic is at historically warm values. And another thing that's interesting, just how historic, Jeremy, the ocean temperatures in the Atlantic, the main development region, for the last 15 months have been setting new records daily. So our water temperatures are more indicative of like a late July, August kind of a time frame, but it really does tell the tale of how ocean temperatures do not equate only to tropical development.
Right. And I think each and every year, whether we're 2 degrees above average, average, or below average, that water is pretty warm out there. You may be talking about water that is in the mid to upper 80s in spots right now. Well, even if it was below average, it would still probably be in the low to mid 80s. So you need 80-degree water temperatures are a little bit warmer. And the deeper that water is, sort of the more fuel that's available for any tropical system that may form. So the water temperatures right now, you're showing them, and you can talk about that. But yeah, they are definitely warm in the Caribbean, Gulf, over towards the Bahamas.
Right. So the magic number when it comes to tropical development is 80 degrees. Give or take atmospheric conditions, certainly. But anytime you see 80-degree water temperatures, it at least has the fuel needed. So obviously, here we are. The Caribbean is usually where June gets things going. And you can see 84, 85, 86-degree water temperatures. And then Jeremy up by you, even though you're further north, you've got the Gulf Stream waters up there, and offshore with the Gulf Stream, you're still talking about 82-degree waters. So to that point, water temperatures around are sufficient for tropical development.
Yeah, and so far, I think we've only had that one area of interest that was down maybe near Cuba, headed towards like southern Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, and it was only a 10% chance of development. That one quickly scooted northeast. We'll see. I think though maybe in the next like week to 2 weeks, so that's bringing us through like middle part of June into maybe the start of the last week. That is a time frame that certainly we'll be keeping an eye on, maybe like Gulf of Mexico into the Southwest Atlantic.
Yeah, so here's the latest computer model data. This is the American GFS, and let's just kind of dive in here and just see what's doing. First off, if you're new to tracking the tropics, what we're looking at here is pressure anomalies. Okay, the blues, the greens, the purples on this map that shows anomalously lower pressure. Tropical systems are essentially just areas of low pressure. Okay. So when you see this map, Florida, up by you, Jeremy, I think we could agree it's been a stormy couple of days, hence the lowered pressure for both of our areas.
Yeah, so what you're looking at there is Eric's going to run that forward, the model. The GFS, which if you follow any of our track in the tropics here, is a if you want tropical systems, I guess that's the one that gives you hope almost every single computer model run. Right now, the European model, it's bringing this pretty big plume of tropical moisture up. You have the GFS up there, right?
Yes, sir. Yep. So
Okay.
we'll go through
And
both, certainly.
what'd you say?
I said we'll go through both, certainly.
Okay, so the GFS, notorious for once you get past maybe 180 or 240 hours, always during hurricane season, seems like it's developing something late in the model run. It's doing that once again. Now, what we start to look at is, okay, does this line up with any of our sort of timelines where we think something should be in a certain spot? And we do think maybe we get later into June, we could see something towards the Gulf or off from the southeast coastline. And there it is. Again, early in the season, our hot spots certainly are valid, but it's just a lot tougher early in the season to get development, just as it would be tough into November. We touched on it. There's shear out there right now. We're not into maybe some of those more favorable or potentially favorable upper level winds that we'll see during peak season.
Right. But there you go. The Gulf to Carolinas low showing kind of in the June 20s and showing that Florida panhandle over toward like the Louisiana, out near Grand Isle, that sort of thing. So that is an
Yeah.
area that we're watching. Now go ahead.
Yeah, and then before we started here, we were looking at like there's a model, probably several now. I don't look at maybe every single long range model that goes out a month or more, but the CFS model, I'll usually give it a glance to see maybe you get 2+ weeks down the road, 3+ weeks down the road if some of its thinking is lining up with what we think should happen. So also coming up within the next month, we have down towards South Florida, maybe into the eastern half of the Gulf. Another opportunity in this one, we'll have to watch closely because it may line up within a few days either side of the 4th of July holiday.
Well, and if that's the case, then that lines up with that part of the pattern certainly as well.
Yep.
So, yeah, always interesting. All right, so let's get back and take a look at the model data here, and let's just kind of go through it. So, what we were showing here just a moment ago is this big plume of moisture forming. And, the GFS, we are at hour 192 here. So just as you mentioned, Jeremy, the GFS just wants to throw something out there always. But if you notice, it's kind of pluming up moisture, trying to bubble it up and then bring it up to the north. It's a little earlier than our time frame would dictate, but it's still kind of starting to show some idea there. So that's interesting. If we switch over to the European model, okay, let's roll through time and notice this is Friday, June 14th. The European is trying to bubble up moisture, not as organized, but it's also kind of Caribbean into the Gulf of Mexico. So, we're starting to see some indicators there, Jeremy, that both of these models are trying to do something. They're just not really sure what just yet.
Yeah, and early in the season, if it's conditions aren't completely favorable, you'll get that tropical moisture, and we may just see a big increase in rain chances. I know when I did our 10-day forecast on TV last night, around next Wednesday, Thursday, I really started to jump rain chances.
Yeah.
You start to get that tropical moisture. One, you're going to have super high like humidity, dew points surging in. Your thunderstorms probably start popping up maybe around midday versus like mid to late afternoon, and also some just torrential downpours are possible. So even though you may not have a tropical system per se, that plume of tropical moisture is definitely going to lead us to some more impactful weather in probably the next 7 to 10 plus days.
100%. My 7-day forecast shows that as well. So, kind of interesting. Now, going from this, let's switch over. And I just want to show this because this is a new one. And I'm curious, Jeremy, you and I have not even off camera discussed this. This is the European AIFS model. It's new. Basically, it's taking European data, throwing artificial intelligence in. So I would say, and I'm curious, like, is Jeremy rolling his eyes at this? But like,
No,
it's new enough we don't know model bias. So we have
right.
to take
I
this
did.
with 100% grain of salt.
I did look at it. I think it was yesterday, and it had some pretty strong looking tropical system developing in the central or western part of the Gulf. I don't know what it does in this run,
So
but what run is this? Like zero Z?
this is 00Z, yeah. So it's the most recent AIFS. So it's showing this is 120 hours out. So this is next Wednesday. It's showing something of an area of low pressure developing, pulling away, and then watch there.
Yeah. Okay.
Really something deep around the
I
20th. I wouldn't
Yeah, and I
count on
think
this.
with any new model that comes out, it's just sort of monitor it, trial and error. I mean, even though we think the GFS more times than not is um, sort of one of the lower models when it comes to tropical accuracy and maybe more of a mid or long range, we still look at it.
Yeah.
So even if this one we're finding, hey, it's got 2 or 3 strikes against it, maybe we'll let it play out another time or two and just kind of see. So maybe what would happen though, I don't know the inner workings of that model. If it's an AI, maybe it's like, okay, I missed this one. Here's why it missed. I don't know if it's that smart to be
Right.
able to kind of real time learn from some of the errors it's creating.
Yeah, I mean, we'll all sit and watch this together, right? But I think that as long as we show it, we're showing transparency and we're saying like, hey, this is something new. Have no idea if it's good or not, but it's kind of like trying a new drink at a tasting. You're like, well, we'll give it the old college try. Don't put much weight into it. I don't know.
Um, all right. So yeah, you're showing that the AI Euro there. Any other models that you
Well,
think?
let's get into some of the ensembles because I think that they're telling the tale that is much more valid. Because looking at, Jeremy, you and I talk about this all the time. Like looking at one model run of one model isn't great, but looking at ensembles, you really can start to see perspective. So this is the GFS ensemble, and watch the Caribbean and the Gulf. You see how we're starting to get these bubbles? These are not like a mega cane or anything like that, but it's different ensemble members trying to throw an area of low pressure together, some stronger than others, but there's Sunday, June 16th, so not this weekend, but next weekend, all the way through like the 20th, 21st, the GFS ensemble trying to bubble something up. And the European, let me switch over. This one only goes out 144 hours out, so let me go to the 00Z. But you'll see the same thing, Jeremy. There's the 16th. Even the European ensembles, trying to figure something out there. They don't have the timing dialed in necessarily, but they're all kind of showing there's something. So they're trying to sniff something out, trying to figure something out there.
Yeah, and if we're going to see something in June, it is probably the middle part through about maybe the 20th to 26th as we are
Yeah.
showing. So if something's going to develop, really favors that time frame, and then the next time frame is that sort of around the July 4th holiday window, and that would be a little bit more probably Eastern Gulf down to South Florida.
Yeah, yeah. So that part of the and so just so that we're all on the same page. So our hurricane forecast, we put this out every year during March 1st. And then we kind of, we tweak the dates as we need to. But I think we've shuffled the dates like 3 or 4 days plus or minus. But we've done it a couple of times. And looking, I think, to next year, we're going to put it out March 1st, and then we're going to put out an update like June 1st for the dates, and then that's
Right.
going to be it.
Yeah, so to be clear, March 1st, we put out a number of named storms, hurricanes, major hurricanes. That doesn't change. Hotspots don't change. Our sort of areas of interest that we highlighted along the coast have not changed. Again, it was just knowing the cycle duration. You get to see it a couple more times. So we're
Yeah.
like, just to give everyone, because these are pretty huge things that we are forecasting here. That we don't take anything lightly. So, yeah, it was a little like a tweak here or there on the dates, sort of on the end ranges. So what we're looking at now is a forecast that we'll play it out and see how things look come November. And we're always very confident in our forecast, even if it's the same as everyone or if it's different. I would say maybe the one difference with ours this year is our numbers may be slightly lower than a lot of the sort
Yeah.
of major outlooks that came out.
Yeah, so this is our numbers: 16 to 20 named storms, 8 to 10 hurricanes, and 3 to 5 majors. And Jeremy, NOAA put out their numbers, and that was the most aggressive set of numbers that they had ever put out. Colorado State University put out their set of numbers, and it was the most aggressive set of numbers they'd ever put out. But in our research and our methodology, and science is always growing, science is always learning, and I'm not knocking them, they're not knocking us. And I think that that's the right way to do it. We can all look at each other's forecasts and understand where they all come from. But for us, looking at the analogs, we found something kind of interesting in a transition which we are going through from El Nino to La Nina. Talk about that.
So I mean, I only found like 4 or 5 years of data where we had something similar, and there was never really any supersized seasons out there, at least from the data we found. And again, the reliable data that I look at for ENSO goes back to about 1950, and I think it was 4 or 5 instances. Um, One of the top season was probably a little bit above average, similar to or at least within a few storms of what we are forecasting. However, there's been some that had like 10 or fewer, I believe,
Yeah.
that were below average. So that's why you can't really just look at one thing
Yeah.
and make your forecast. So ENSO to us, we've gone against the grain of El Nino or La Nina the last 2 years, and our forecast again outperformed the major forecasts the last 2 years because we went a little bit against the El Nino or La Nina, what you would typically think,
Right.
and we went with more what we were seeing with the pattern.
Well, and I mean, I think case in point, historically hot water temperatures, and we've had zero named storms. The 30-year average is not to have a named storm yet, but it's the first year in about a decade that we've had such a quiet, both Atlantic and Pacific basin. So I think that there is some validity to it. You know, certainly we're not going to sit here and do a kumbaya of we're great, everybody else isn't. That's just not the way we operate.
Right.
But I think that, observing where things are, observing the patterns is what you and I do. And I always say this, but I'll say it again. I'm grateful for you to teach me long range forecasting. And I think that I think we're on par for where we expect to be. And I do think to that point, things will probably get cooking over these next few months. But the
Yeah,
question
and
is,
we could get
go ahead.
yeah, and we could get into August or September, and boom, you have a month where there's like 8 to 10 storms that form.
Right.
So And you can have a month that maybe June ends up with like 0 to 1 or 2 storms,
Yeah.
which it should. I mean, you look at the average, June should be a quiet month. We didn't have a storm in May. July is also, I mean, climatologically, a very quiet month. So it's really August, September, the front half of October where you get the bulk of the storms.
Right. I mean, this graphic really shows it, right? So there's June and July on the bottom left corner, and watch how the storm it storms per 100 years because we're nerds and we get into the statistics of it. But just look at the graph. It's really like early August through honestly mid to late October that you get the bulk of the activity. So we are quiet now. We should be quiet now. So it does pan out that way. But it is, I think that like anything else, it is interesting that we have had historically hot water temperatures and no storms. That just really goes to show weather is difficult. Science is
Right.
amazing, and we're always learning, and we always should be learning.
Yeah, so it'll be an interesting season, but I do think as we go through the next weeks to a couple months, we're going to have some extra tracking the tropics to do. I think just because of where our hotspots are
Yeah.
located, and we know it takes one little system to spin up, like say in the Gulf, and within 24 hours that could be a category 2, 3 plus
Yeah.
storm very fast.
And the statistic that was interesting that I found, I was at the Florida Governor's Hurricane Conference. I was at the National Hurricane Conference. Very lucky they're all within driving distance to me. Jeremy, you had to schlep if you did. So anyway, but the one thing that I think was particularly interesting is that all of the Category 5 hurricanes to strike were tropical storms just days before landfall. So to your point, usually it's that last second development as they're into the Caribbean or into the Gulf or right over the Gulf Stream waters. They're close to land, and it's that rapid intensification. All the Category 5s, I'd have to go back and get the exact statistic, but I want to say in the last 50 years, maybe it's the last 100 years, they all rapidly intensified days before landfall. And Andrew, Michael, Matt, all of these storms are examples.
Yeah, and I think one thing to stress, you said you had the governor's hurricane conference down there
Yeah.
back in the front half of May. Hurricane awareness tour was in the Low Country, so I was at that. I had a chance to interview and talk to the director of the National Hurricane Center, Michael Brennan. I think the one thing he stressed was just because something has not happened in your area in a previous hurricane season doesn't mean that it's not going to happen this season. So that's why we say it and we say, hey, get prepared. Make sure you know what to do if a storm starts to threaten your area, because at some point you run this forward decades, 100 years, 200 years, there will likely be a storm that hits your area if you're on the Gulf Coast, Florida, or probably along the southeast coastline. Maybe it hasn't happened in 100 years or more, but if you run forward in time, at some point it will.
Well, and to that point, like my brother lives in Tampa, and they always say they can't get hit by a hurricane, and it's like, yeah, you can. Or I remember I interviewed at a television. This is 1,000 years ago. You're stuck with me, Jeremy. But I remember I interviewed at a television station in Jacksonville 1,000 years ago, and they're like, "Oh, we just play air traffic control. We shift them to South Florida, or we shift them up to the Carolinas." And it's like, okay, but that's not to say that it will always be that way. There's going to be storms that hit areas. The repeat cycle may be much longer between storms historically, but history doesn't always indicate the future.
Yeah, I think I was looking at a graphic yesterday. I don't have it up in front of me, but it had like every county along the East Coast, Florida, and Gulf Coast, and it said the last occurrence of a major hurricane, and it had like five or less years ago,
Yeah.
like 5 to 10, 10 to 20, and then like 50, 100 plus. And I think the county I'm in here for Savannah, Chatham County, it's been more than 100 years since a major hurricane has directly impacted this area. So you can say you're due, but I don't really look at it that way because I mean, look here in the last maybe 5, 10, 20 years, you hear about like, oh, it's a 100-year flood, 500-year flood, and the frequency may happen a little more often in some areas. So
Yeah.
just because something hasn't happened, as the director of the National Hurricane Center was saying, doesn't mean it can't happen. whether it's this season or future seasons.
For sure. So at least for now, it's quiet and should be quiet through the weekend, which will get us then to our next Tracking the Tropics, which will be on Tuesday of next week at 10 a.m.
Yeah, so you don't have to wait long. You can see us back on here. But I think what will happen is we'll get a much better idea of some of these models, like the GFS and that AI version of the Euro. We can maybe just kind of keep an eye on those and be like, hey, you know what? Maybe they are more in tune with what's going on, or the other models are starting to latch
Yeah.
on to what they have. So it's early in the season. Uh, we won't judge the models too much yet, will we? Or will we?
We will, because that's who we are, but that's okay. Listen, as long as we have an open dialogue and all of our friends joining us this morning and every edition of Tracking the Tropics, they can do the same thing. So, all right. You got anything else to add, my friend?
No, we'll be back on Tuesday though at 10 a.m. and then hopefully we'll be as consistent as possible. I know you have a trip coming up. I
Yeah.
also have a trip. So June, we'll try to juggle things, do the best we can. But once it gets into like July, August, September, I don't have any big trips planned because usually you plan those and then you get away and then here comes the hurricane or
And
something.
and then the boss calls and says, "Hope you had trip insurance, buddy."
Yes.
All right. Well, listen, thank you all for joining us. We'll see you on Tuesdays and probably more often than that as the season continues. But for now, all is quiet from sunny Central Florida. I'm West 2 meteorologist Eric Burris.
And from Savannah, Georgia, I'm WJCL 22 Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson.
Thanks for watching.